Welcome to Curator Highlights. My name is Zoé Watson. I'm the curator of the Holden Gallery at Manchester School of Art, and I'm delighted to be joined by Harriet Cooper, Head of Visual Arts at Jerwood Arts, Miles Thurlow, co-founder and director of Workplace, and Zoé Whitley, director of Chisenhale Gallery. We're here to discuss some of the great work that has come out of this year's Class of 2020 digital showcase at Manchester School of Art called In Progress. The impact of COVID-19 and lockdown happened just as our final year students were starting to prepare for their final bodies of work and devising plans for exhibiting at the annual degree show. These students have had their art school experience abruptly interrupted when all areas of work, including assessments, were moved online. The digital showcase is evidence of the students' achievements despite lockdown measures, and I'm impressed with their resilience and creativity through this time. As a way of celebrating some of the talent from the Class of 2020, I've invited Harriet, Miles and Zoe to highlight some work from the digital showcase. So welcome all, thanks for being here. Harriet, thank you for joining us. Would you be happy to begin?
Definitely. It's been so great to kind of see the breadth of work that's being made, and I think I felt like I probably spent much more time than I would normally have going through all the profiles. So yeah, I think it's definitely been a really great way to see it. And I'm sure we'll talk about that later in more depth, but I found it super hard to pick just sort of three that kind of really stood out to me. So I was going to be really cheeky and just name check some others that I thought were fantastic, and I'm sure that other people might talk about. But Anya Pencil's textile work I thought was really brilliant, and Carrie Lewis's project, particularly looking at twins and the psychology of that and the vulnerability of being raised in that way. Amina Khan's gifts were really, really fascinating, kind of looking at Pakistani WhatsApp and cultures to show the reality of immigration. Jasper Howard and Bryn Rogers, there was so many brilliant works that really stood out that, yeah, it was tricky, but I'm really excited to talk about, I guess, these three artists who kind of touched my gut or my curatorial interests in different ways. So the first person I'd love to talk about is Karnika Sukadia. So Karnika is graduating from the Textile in Practice course, and in her statement she talks a lot around how colour and pattern and the textures that she grew up with influenced the work that she's been making, and also about the role of textiles in different cultures, particularly in Indian and Thai cultures, in signifying status, wealth, religious, and standing within communities. And I think for me, I was really, drawn into the work aesthetically. She's shown in the In Progress show 2 bodies of textile work in particular. This one that you can see on screen at the moment looks at, I guess both bodies actually, look at landscape and the impact that human settlement has on it. This within a more rural context, but another project that's looking at it within an urban kind of city context. And I was really drawn to this body of work in particular, which looks at the impact of human development and climate change on the Chao Phraya River in Thailand. Within the work, she's using different techniques and embroidery stitch work on quite a neutral, earthy kind of plane in an abstract motif to look at kind of a bird's eye mapping of both the river itself and the way that human settlement has moved and changed around that. And I think that response to thinking about climate change and human development in that way by embedding it into textiles, which are part of our daily life, felt really interesting to me. I was really drawn to the kind of formal aesthetics and the freeness with which Karnika is using stitch in this to talk about environmental conversations, and that flattening and reproduction of the forms that is both abstract but also quite specific within that. I think it's a really good way of making imagery that feels recognisable. It feels recognisably about bringing kind of space together and different landscapes, but it's also very specific to a particular place which she has a strong connection to. I think even without looking really closely at the details of kind of the symbols that are making up houses or rivers, I had this real sense of, I guess, this kind of gathering of I guess, imagery or kind of aspects around the blue lines, which brought to me these ideas of this community, collectivity, the way that historically and culturally we gather around sources of richness, whether that be in landscape or whether that be in people. So yeah, I think I found that a really beautiful way to look at it. Really, I had quite personal connections to the method of drawing, and I think I studied art originally, and I very much kind of maybe used a similar approach in my own drawing, but Karnika sort of says is I use my embroidery as a way of embellishment, but I also use it to draw. I let the thread do its work and the needle takes me to where it wants to go. And I think that feels like a really kind of sensitive way to describe the way that she is using that line and that thread to explore different things and to kind of see how the formal elements of that come together. It definitely brought to mind the American artist Ann Wilson's sort of topologies, which are made up of drawings kind of using hair and lace and thread, and they give you this opportunity to kind of look across kind of the landscape or a landscape and think about the power that we have within that. And yeah, in thinking about climate change, impact on our environment, that felt like it feels like a really appropriate way to do that. Okay, so the second artist whose work I was really interested to talk about was Josie Tothill. So Josie is graduating from the Interactive Arts course, and I thought there was some really fascinating work across that course. And Josie's really stood out to me for the way that she's bringing together sort of different values of folk traditions and consideration of the human place in urban and rural landscapes. In her words, she says that she playfully materializes rituals for the overthrow of capitalism. So I don't think I could really say it any better than that. Collaboration and community seem really key to this process from the way that she's described her work within the statement. And it feels, from what she has shown within the In Progress show, it's created a really kind of rich exploration of these ideas, which is manifest in a really broad kind of range of outcomes and projects. In the In Progress show, that includes things like sort of spoofed TED talk that's about how not to fall asleep at work, or found words, which are kind of almost form poems, which are from found impressions on typewriter ribbons. A music video, growing sort of seeds from clay vases, buried statue of Boris Johnson. So there's so many different ways that the ideas are coming together. But I think what really stood out to me is that each of those works felt really strong, but actually as a body of work presented online in this way, there is something about the way that she was able to bring together a really consistent poetry and ethos behind each of those works that just made me really excited to know her mind better, and kind of, I guess, just really excited about the way that she was thinking around the things that she was encountering. And I think that's what makes her work really exciting. So I've been really fascinated by the different things that she was showing in the In Progress show for all of those reasons. But perhaps one of the things that really personally drew me to it was this aspect of collaboration that she has in her work. And I think she articulated it really well within the statement that accompanied the work she showed. And she said very simply, I've never made art alone. And I think in the context that she talks about it, she talks about that being whether it's with communities or whether it's actually with quite close relationships. And she mentions in particular a collaborative relationship with her partner, Nick. And then all the stories that I guess kind of from working with people kind of bring a real richness to the work. For me, I have a real personal kind of research interest in collaborative practice and the different forms that takes. And it's something that I've worked on a little bit at Jerwood Arts since I've been there. And I think to be able to acknowledge that and see the richness it brings into the work at this stage in her career is a really interesting thing. And I kind of really love to think about that more, because so much of the research I've been doing around this area shows that a lot of structures within the art world are still not supporting that type of practice in a really equitable way. Thinking about, how do you collaborate during education, or funding galleries, the art market, like collaborative practices still really struggle. So I'm really interested, I guess, to hear more about how that develops, whether that continues to be more artistic collaborations with her partner, or whether it continues to be more community-led. So yeah, I was really impressed with the way that she was articulating it at this stage, and the kind of really clear richness it brings to the work. The piece that's on screen at the moment is a particular favourite of mine. I think there's a really beautiful simplicity to this kind of thought of how you kind of grow, and I guess where those things come from, this functionality of, I guess, what would normally hold a kind of cut plant or water, to use that to grow something that sustains us or kind of brings more to life, I think was it's a really beautiful cycle, and kind of made me think quite hard about the different ways that we kind of try transplant things from their natural environments, whether that be people and communities or plants and industry. So yeah. And the third person I was really interested to talk about was Babaloo Webb, who is also graduating from the Interactive Arts course. In Babaloo's work, she's using a lot of really organic materials, like dust or hair and taxidermy, but alongside more sort of latex and nails and kind of metal structures that create a framework for those elements to sit on. She talks about using these objects to expose pollution and taboo in kind of what we're doing as a society and in personal experiences. I really thought that she wrote really beautifully in her statement, and had a really expressive way of talking about what she was doing. And in her words, she had said, hair is like a dust that is left behind, a universal shrine to before. Dust is like a skin. It is an eternal organ, full of life on every object and being. And I think I was really interested in the way that she was able to use that statement to connect the work that she was showing to that element of time, and the way she was thinking about time and our existence, whether that be through life and death or day to day, how that kind of extends the materiality of what we leave in the world as well. I was really attracted to this work because of the use of materials and the rawness in that. There's a real emotion in the tensions that you see in the materials that she's using, and particularly around the sort of stretching and structuring of the latex within that. I thought a lot about sort of Heidi Buchler or Eva Hesse's work, but I think there was sort of a suspense and at times kind of a revulsion in the way that Babaloo was using this that I think is quite unique. I'm not always a huge fan of taxidermy within installation or within visual arts, but I could really see the place that it holds in the work that she's doing, and I guess that what it speaks to in terms of that gesture between life and death, and the reality of the materials that we kind of shed through that process as well, whether that's hair, dust, saliva, skin. And I thought the sculpture is one of the things that I feel is kind of been a lot harder to represent in this online presentation in progress. And I think I thought the materiality of the work came across really well in the imagery that was there, but it did really make me want to experience it in person, to be there in the room, to smell it, to kind of stand next to it and feel the size of my body in that relation to that, because it looks quite large scale and kind of, I think there was something really compelling about the actual structure of it that definitely makes me want to be there and recoil from it, because parts of it are quite hard and heavy. The image that's on screen at the moment is actually probably the image that really drew me into the work more, and on the website I think it's called Llama Hair, and I think this is in contrast to the other images that she's presenting, which are of this sculptural installation. I just felt that this was actually a really beautiful image in its own right. Even as a photograph, I think it felt like there was a real poignancy to the moment that it was holding, and I was really intrigued to know more about it. Babaloo hasn't really expanded much on it in her statement, but I think it definitely made me delve further into the work that she's showing on Instagram. And I've seen, I know there's a couple of other installations or performances that have used sculpted and felted hair in this way. And I'm really interested to know more kind of about that part of the practice, because it felt like there's something about it that just really grabbed my gut when I saw that image. So, yeah.
Thanks so much, Harriet. Just following on from what you were saying about this kind of experience of viewing art online, there's some obvious positives and negatives drawn from this. And, you know, particularly with our student cohort, the potential audience demographic is much wider than perhaps a physical show. And so how have you found this process of viewing art, and what you usually take away from degree shows?
I think it definitely made me think about how I normally experience degree shows when I go to them physically. And, you know, if anything, I think in some ways it felt like a much more equitable process of viewing work, because it was less about standing in a space and seeing, I guess, maybe being influenced by what shouts loudest or is brightest or has the most space or kind of sits. I think in a strange way, actually, it gave an opportunity for works that are more intimate and works that are more subtle to kind of really stand out. And I felt, I mean, I definitely had a list of about 30 artists I would have loved to talk about by the time I'd been through a few of the different courses. And that's really exciting. I had, you know, I think, as I said a little bit before, kind of sculpture, I think, is a lot harder to present in this way. But I think maybe what it made me realise is that when I go and see degree shows normally, I'm often kind of looking for those works or those artists where I'll write down their name because I'm really excited to see what they do next. And I'm really excited by the potential of the work and what's in what they're showing. And if anything, kind of having been able to spend the time with the degree show online in this way has given me a really big list of artists I'm really excited to see next. And I believe there is intentions that we will see these works sort of, or evolutions of kind of their practice in future, kind of physical presentation of the degree show ideally. And that's really exciting because it, you know, I feel like I have a bigger connection to a wider range of work that I would really love to see in person now. So, yeah.
Okay. Thanks so much, Harriet. Hello, Miles.
Hello.
Thanks for being here. I just, wonder if you can share some of the works that you've been drawn to.
Sure, absolutely. Fischer Mustin. I mean, I just think this is excellent painting, and I nearly didn't choose him because I saw he won a prize, and that made me feel resistant. But then just looking through the work, I think it's really, really outstanding painting, and I think it's worthy of talking about. And interestingly, I came to, I think it was last year, I was at Manchester Degree Show. I think there's something there in Manchester that's bubbling away, that's related very, you know, about painting, that is starting to really come through, which I find very exciting. And there's a sort of a strong relationship to this traditional classical training, and then a kind of moving out into a quite surreal, politicized response to the world. And I find that really interesting that this is starting to happen in Manchester. And I was just really excited to see the work. And I think that the relationship to, you know, there's a clear relationship in Fischer's work to people like Paul McCarthy, to George Condo, Donna Schutz, you know, even Rembrandt. This sort of quite defiled, dirty, Baroque cartoon sort of, you know, it speaks of somebody who is looking outward and living their life and exploring, you know, subcultures and pulling it into the work in a way that's really sort of vital and interesting. And I'm just really excited to see more, actually. And it also, the other thing, he didn't have a statement as well, which was quite intriguing. Mm-hmm. So I'm just intrigued and excited to learn more about this artist. I think he's one to watch.
Right.
Amidst a whole cohort of artists to watch. I mean, I don't want to be exclusive about this. It was very, very difficult to pick 3 people to talk about. Daniel Johnson, I found really, I sort of nearly skipped past this artist because there was one image on the site, and this very short statement that I thought was really intriguing. I just want to read it for you. He says, "I find myself repeatedly drawn to the mechanism of striving forwards towards an infinitely receding endpoint, and how in doing so it becomes a form of destination in and of itself. I enjoy the process of deferring the arrival, of extending the time and space of the in-between. With this in mind, it is apt that my work remains uncompleted due to COVID. My proposal was to attempt to fly using only non-mechanical methods and without an education of aeronautics. This is how far I got." And I just thought there was just something really sort of beautifully poignant about the failure of Daniel, in a way, in his attempts to be able to fly. And looking, it pulled me into looking at his website, which is on the page, the Manchester page, and just seeing some of the other works that he'd made, and attempting to sort of these sort of very romantic, impossible attempts to achieve something, and that, of course, he's not going to be able to do this. And I think the way in which he sort of writes about the it's almost this kind of eccentric, slightly Heath Robinson attitude that's very, very endearing and sweet and beautiful. And I think that I get the sense with Daniel that he's an artist that will be even if he wasn't doing a degree and wasn't, whatever, he would be doing this kind of thing. And I think there's something about that I really love. And it reminds me of people like Simon Starling. There's an artist that we've worked with at Workplace called Richard Rigg, who has a very similar kind of quite poetic approach to the everyday, to life. And it really, this work and some of the videos on his website really kind of caught my attention and made me want to learn more. So
there's one work on his website where he tried to build a contraption that would turn the lights back on in the art school studios when they automatically go off at night, and that just felt so I'm very familiar with that feeling. So
just a really great, and he talks about the light switch, it's called, actually. I'm just looking at it now, and the text around the work is about a machine as a solution to the annoying problem of when working late in the studios at night, the lights turn off automatically. This would mean that I would have to stand up every now and again to wave at the light. It's so funny that I thought it would be easier to build this machine than to go through the bureaucratic nightmare of university admin.
Yeah.
I just think there's this sort of general attempt to solve these slightly irritating problems that we all face that somehow clog up our daily lives. They irritate and frustrate. So I enjoyed Daniel's work. It says my internet connection is unstable, so maybe Daniel can kind of sort out a contraption to figure it out for me.
You cut off for a moment, but you're back now. So it's
okay. Theresa Cabrera Marino. I found this work very intriguing. I'm just going to flag up her page. It's quite sort of, there's aspects of historical works here, from the kind of graffiti boys through Basquiat, Keith Haring, Kenny Scharf. There's a sense of autobiography that I'm really interested in. I think that there's a socio-political context to her work. She talks about growing up on a small tropical and volcanic island to the west of Morocco, and I think these kind of political sort of undercurrents are very present in her work. I liked this I get the sense of this person exploring her own identity, but also how that fits into a kind of global narrative and a political narrative. And I really enjoy the sort of liveliness of it, and also some of the other works, because their works are quite varied. Actually, they have these sort of quite they're conundrums. You know, they have this sort of symbolic relationship to each other, and but beautifully composed. And this sort of bent cigarette here, smoking next to a pylon broadcasting electricity, and then a trumpet. You know, they're very playful and very they're slightly anarchic and subversive, I think, and I found them very refreshing. There was also a really nice it was like a drawing. I'm just trying to find it on the website here, and it's a drawing of a leg with a stiletto heel, and it says neoliberalism valued by the market and the state, but fuck you. I just think there's just an attitude that comes across that is lively and confident, and I hope it continues to do so. I'm sure it will.
Thanks so much, Miles. I wonder if I could just ask, most students have shared their Instagram handles as for further information and ways to contact. And I suppose this is becoming increasingly a site for research, and I just wonder if that's, a sort of method of research for you.
I think personally, I think it's research. I'm much. I think when I hear Harriet talking and how thoroughly she'd written about everybody, I feel like the word research doesn't necessarily apply in the same way for me. I think we're bombarded with images, artwork, voices from everywhere, and certainly when you see somebody you're interested in, then you follow up and you look further. But yeah, I think artists can exist on Instagram very well, and we live in an increasingly social, well, even though we're isolated, this increasingly social world. So yeah, that's not much of an answer to your question.
I've just noticed it's kind of one of the first point of contact for most of the students, so it's clearly kind of their realm, and it's
a social media channel of choice for the art world, I think. Instagram at the moment anyway.
Yeah,
I guess because it's so image and video heavy.
Yeah. Thanks. And Zoe, thanks for being here. And would you mind introducing some of the work that you were drawn to?
Hi, Zoe. Thank you very much for having me. And I've enjoyed listening to everyone else's feedback. And as they said, I think the most important thing is to really encourage all of the artists. And so I know it's already been said, but these three are by no means a kind of barometer whereby the other artists haven't also done some excellent and really eye-catching work. But for the sake of, this type of format and wanting to just highlight a few things, without further ado, so if we go to the first image. So this is a work by Anya Pencil, Your Mom Eats Like a Camel. And it's made with acrylic wool and synthetic hair on Hessian. I was really immediately struck by these works. I'm interested in different approaches to materials and techniques, and particularly where there's been a more recent interest in looking at ways that one might breach what had previously been these very rigid distinctions between the so-called fine arts and craft. And we see that certainly there are artists like Carolina Contra who've done such interesting work as a fiber artist, but the way in which that was something that before certainly more recent times, you would have to specifically seek out in the context of either a craft fair or a crafts council, a gallery that specialized in what we might think of as fiber arts. I was so interested in the work that I went and sought out an interview that Anya had done. She's born and raised in North Wales, and jokingly said that the only other Welsh Ghanaian that she knew was her sister. And I think that thinking about materiality, you know, how that there's this synthetic hair, some of the works include the artist's own hair. There might be another image. Mm-hmm. Thank you. So here we have Anya Yin. I will read out some of these quotes. That when she was young, I was obsessed with the idea of having long blonde hair. The lack of diversity in my area meant no one knew how to braid my hair, so I taught myself. By the time I was 9, I could braid my hair myself. And this way of not only the role, again, where I started by talking about some of the kind of outmoded delineations between fine art and craft. I think that's also true in relation to thinking about the role of the artist being self-taught. So even these ways of learning and imbuing knowledge, and certainly for these hook and rag rug techniques and various things that we think of as craft, in the way those are traditionally handed down in a domestic setting. And it's no different in Anya's case, because she talks about having learned these techniques from her grandmother. And I began to think about a whole host of uses of certainly African American or, you know, African diasporic textured hair within the context of art history. So whether we think of David Hammons, or someone who you're likely not familiar with, a woodcarver named Elijah Pierce, who was also a lay preacher and a barber, and in some of his works would use human hair from the barbershop. A Nigerian contemporary artist named Temitayo Ogunbiyi, who painstakingly draws elaborate hairstyles and braids, or an artist working with braids, also in a three-dimensional sense, like Mishak Gaba. I think there's a whole range of references and a kind of rich and varied history in which I could see Anya's work kind of very seamlessly entering a group exhibition or other contexts, and the ways in which this work becomes an excavation of learned patterns of how we cope in a racist society is also something that felt really incredibly poignant to me, because it's not dogmatic, but the work is immediately arresting, and knowing that these techniques become a way to express and reclaim something, that these textures can also evoke a kind of softness and sources of comfort, is something that felt very important and instructive. And it made me wonder whether Anya was familiar with a book that a Black Irish writer named Emma Dabiri has written relatively recently, called Don't Touch My Hair, about the kind of history and the whole, like, very, very entangled, no pun intended, socio-political realities of Black hair. And so I thought that the work was really incredibly strong and so unique. You know, I hadn't seen anything like it. So to have developed such a pronounced visual language of her own coming out of a BA felt really very exciting for what's to come. And the next work that I'd alighted upon was Snogrious Grimshaw. And this work is so confessional and vulnerable. And at the same time, it has this commanding quality that's imbued with a really urgent sense of agency. I also appreciated that even within the pseudonym, that there was, again, a real knowledge and acknowledgement of art history. So Snogrious being a sculpture made around 1834 by William Pink that's in the Royal Academy's collection. William Blake would have drawn from this cast. So a professor of anatomy named William Hunter had performed these dissections for the students, but as an alternative to how complicated and complex a process that was. There was an anatomical cast that was commissioned by a sculptor named Carlini, and you have this very muscular corpse of a smuggler that would have just come from the gallows. So there are all these levels of criminality and the social position of this figure that's now on display. And so this flayed figure was posed in the same position as the Roman statue of the dying Gaul, and then given this kind of again this sense of effectively trying to elevate the term smuggler in this kind of classical sense as the smugglerius. And if you'll allow me, again, the honesty and the vulnerability of the artist's own statement was very arresting to me. Mm-hmm. I used to be a sex worker. I used to have sex with men for money. My clients were seldom my own age, mostly older men. As someone who was a victim of online grooming at the hands of older men, I suppose it's a way of reclaiming my power and asserting it under my own terms. And later on in the statement, Smugglerius states, "My practice is not limited to one medium. The bricolage practice of using tools that are immediately available allows me to intuitively play with my environment, sculpting a new word where I am queen, yet with objects from the real one. My practice has come into fruition as I synthesize, layer, amalgamate developmental pieces into my autonomous bastard children, born out of my womb of discontent. I grew up in a near suffocating environment of strict social norms. This is a reaction to all that pomp and circumstance, and the gleeful times I've spent divorcing myself from such an insipid world." So I think that's important as well, that there is this element of freedom and joy, and it isn't a flattened single story of exploitation or loss. They told me to suppress my femininity, sexuality, to pretend the abuse didn't happen. Say you were never a sex worker, paint some pretty pictures, and forget about it. This is me breaking that stranglehold, gasping for air and standing proud. So I wanted to acknowledge not only the bravery in speaking so honestly, but in creating work that is really rewards these kind of multiple viewings. It made me think of photographers like Ajamu and what it meant to be creating unapologetically queer work at a time when that would not have been socially acceptable. This kind of post-internet bricolage that Grimshaw speaks of reminds me of a lot of the work of an artist named Jacoby Satterwhite, based in the United States, whose work I have great respect for. And Jacoby Satterwhite's early works were collaborations with his mother in ways to address not only mental illness and his mother's own artworks and the works that she made being housebound, but finding this freedom through the medium of manipulating images through using software online and other things. It also made me think in some ways of artists like Jamie Crew and how interesting their work is coming out of Scottish-based practice. So many of these stills, I felt like they were stills, like I could see them being animated or, existing as moving image. And so I was wondering where that might lead. And then in a different register, again, because of the strength with which this self-presentation is evoked, it also made me think of Rachel McLean and this kind of very over-the-top sense of using face paint and ornamentation to clad the body and to create these narratives that are really rich and immersive. So I just wanted to really acknowledge that how much I responded to this autobiographical kind of tenderness and rebellion, and the fact that those various things could coexist. Thank you. And my third and final artist that I wanted to talk about was Jennifer Wally, who creates these crocheted blankets as a kind of meditation on grief and loss. In a formal sense, it immediately made me think of a fiber artist like Zenobia Bailey, who'd learned a number of these kind of domestic techniques from her own mother, and who was also aware that these blankets, even as they exist as pre-made things, could have a very particular quality in our lives. And one of the things that Zenobia Bailey reflected on was that her mother was able to create a beautiful ambiance with nothing, because she would get afghans and quilts and other blankets from the Salvation Army and use those to decorate the house and to create this kind of warm, colorful, inviting art installation. So this sense of being wrapped in something, this kind of cocooning, this sense of being able to protect us, or at least to create a little bit of buffer from these feelings of grief and loss, was something that was very important, I felt, and that was conveyed in a way that was very persuasive. And then, as we know, within art historical contexts, throughout the 1970s and 80s, Rosemary Truckle or Faith Wilding, Louise Bourgeois were all artists who were looking to knitting and crocheting and kind of reclaiming what had once been a fairly potentially suffocating marker of domesticity and of obligations for female labor, and kind of reshaping that as a tool of empowerment from a feminist perspective of making. And thinking about that kind of longer history felt very, it's something that really came to the fore immediately when I was looking at these works. And then obliquely, it reminded me of work that I had seen when I was in Senegal for one of the Dakar Biennales, and a young artist named Mam Diar Nyang was able to make a site-specific work, which translates to ethereal in title, that spoke of grief and exhumation and the materiality of the funeral shroud. So there were all of these, immediately all these kind of torrent of references came to me, and I thought that that was really very impressive, that there was something that felt very resolved and clear in Wally's presentation of her works and her reference points. So congratulations to not only these three artists, but all of them.
Thank you so much, Zoe. I wonder if I could ask, and I'll open it up to all of you if I may, if you have any advice that you could give to our graduating students.
I guess I would say don't give up. I have so much respect for artists, that bravery that I spoke of in relation to Snogrious. I think that's true of all artists, because you're the first person who has to see that you're an artist and believe that, and then you put that out into the world. But within that, that doesn't mean that success with a capital S always comes immediately or from every corner. And there are ways in which you can continue to develop the work, to rely on what I hope you have is a supportive network of peers and people who support you and are in your corner. In another talk, or in a number of other talks that I give, I often relate back to a quote that Philida Barlow gave about success, and about how there's youth success, there's phenomenal success, and then there's the success of an artist keeping going through hell and high water. and I don't wish hell or high water for anyone, but just knowing that there are different modes of how you'll be able to work and to create not only a body of work, but a career for yourselves in ways that are ultimately rewarding, but that may not come immediately with institutional acclaim or big solo shows, but that's only one marker of success. Mm-hmm. And so even within an exercise such as this, where some of your peers have been spoken about specifically, that doesn't take away from your work and what you can offer. Mm-hmm. I always find it to be such a peculiar thing that in the art world there can be like a certain amount of momentum where, as Lubena Himmet has referred to it, kind of working in the wilderness years, or, you're making work in the high weeds, and then all of a sudden, you are nominated for an award, and then this opportunity comes, and, there's a certain amount of consensus building that can happen in the art world, and that can feel very frustrating or confounding, or certainly, like, well, how has this happened all at once? Mm-hmm. Or not? But as I say, just find ways to keep going, because we need artists in the world.
Mm-hmm. It's fun. Miles, Harriet, if you had anything to add.
I would wholeheartedly agree with everything Zoe just said. I think that Phillida quote is it's such an important one in remembering the longevity of a career, and how personal success and professional success aren't always what they look like on Instagram or in the news. And I think that's really important. I guess at this moment, continuing, I think, is really important. We need those voices. We need people to challenge how we see the world and to bring new ways of looking at it. And I guess I would, from maybe from my own kind of experience of graduating from a practical course many years ago now, I would just really encourage those artists graduating to continue to kind of really think about their peer group and their support group, as Zoe's also said, but also to continue to seek criticality, to not feel that kind of what you've made at the culmination of this 3 years is who you are as an artist, to continue to see where that takes you and make sure that you are happy to push those boundaries of where you want to go. And get input on that. I think asking for critical advice is hard. I think it's hard to ask people to kind of say what they think of your work, but it's uncomfortable, and sometimes it's not very nice, but it will always kind of help you crystallize your own ideas and kind of how you feel about certain things you're doing. And I think that's what really helps a lot of artists continue to push their practice into places that excites them and keeps them motivated when at those times where it isn't as easy to keep going.
Sorry.
Beautifully put by Zoe and Harriet. So without just repeating the same things, which is very, some practical things that I was thinking as you were both talking. I mean, good documentation, really important. It's really worth investing, if you can, in getting decent quality images and documentation of your work. Keep momentum, get out there, keep doing stuff, keep organising shows with your friends, go to private views if you can. It's really, obviously at the moment we can't. There are a million and one barriers to participating in the art world. Geography, kids, money, all these things. But don't be afraid to try and connect to people. You can only be rejected and forgotten, and then you can try again, and just keep trying without hassling people, in a polite way. I think putting yourself out there is really, really important. And when you get knocked down, pick yourself up and get back on, and I think it's a tough road. I absolutely echo the idea, the different modes of success, I think is very, very true. And, this is a lifelong commitment that you're making. And even if you end up doing something completely different, I think that you retain something of this in-depth commitment that you've made while you're studying, and good luck to everyone, really.
I'd just like to end by thanking Harriet, Miles and Zoe for their insights, and also to congratulate our graduates at Manchester School of Art. If you haven't had a chance to see the show yet, you can visit inprogress.mmu.ac.uk, and there's a load of other events and talks happening on there as well, so be sure to check that out. But thank you very much for participating in this, and yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.